Antes de empezar, quisiera hacer una breve introducción. Agradezco a Tember por compartir su historia y quisiera aclarar un par de cosas. La primera es de que algunas personas pueden ver los temas que vamos a tocar en este video como sensibles y puede llegar a afectar. Quisiera aclarar que, número uno, algunas cosas de las que va a hablar Tember en cuanto a cómo ha decidido vivir su vida son personales de él. Esto tiene dos implicaciones. La primera es que, número uno, no estoy fomentando que todas las personas vivan como Tember. Así que es una experiencia individual para él, que tal vez funcione para él, pero no funcione para alguien más. Así que quiero aclarar, número uno, que es eso. Es solo su historia y no es una fomentación a hacer exactamente lo que él hizo. Número dos, que respeten la decisión que él ha tomado y no lo insulten y tampoco insulten su inteligencia en los comentarios o que alguien llegue a contactarlo y decirle de cosas. Así que solo es respeto y de igual forma expresar que si para alguien este tema es sensible, sepa que no estoy diciendo al publicar el video que esta es la única forma de pensar. Es una de las formas de pensar, es su historia, es su experiencia y espero que la veamos así. Sin más que agregar, comencemos. Welcome, Temper, and thank you for being here today. I think that your story has a lot of interesting perspectives about the gospel and about uh, what it's like to come to terms with one's self and also love for God. So I think it will be very interesting. But before we do that, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am a native of Southern California. I obviously am a convert to the church, although I was raised in a part member family. Um, and I got baptized when I was 22. Um, and I'm married now with a couple small children and live in Idaho. Um, so that's kind of my brief history.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you were a convert to the
Mhm.
church. Speaking for myself, I was born a member. But I always like to uh, listen how people come to know about the church. You mentioned that you were raised in a part member family. Uh, what were your what was your upbringing like? What was the teachings of? Did you have any teachings about religion, God?
Yeah, so I was raised in a pretty conservative uh, LDS Christian family. So my dad is LDS, my mom is evangelical Christian, and my my brother and I were raised more predominantly LDS. Um, but we were never baptized because my mom disagreed with church teaching. So um, so we knew the teachings of the church pretty well growing up. But we lived in kind of like the split religious household where we kind of got saw both sides of the theological spectrum. So I always felt more drawn to the Latter-day Saint faith and its beliefs because it just seemed more true to me as a child. Um, I could never really understand the concept of God that my mom's church taught. Um, but it got a little complicated because my mom took us to her anti-cult ministry leader who talked about all the complicated church history stuff to us when we were young. And it got even more complicated when I hit puberty and started experiencing same-sex attraction, which I'm sure we're going to talk about this interview. My relationship with the church changed a lot because of that experience as well. So it's kind of it's been an evolving thing.
I see, and maybe I'll put a pin on that. I think we'll come back to it later.
Mhm.
I'll just make sure not to forget. But
Mhm.
you mentioned that as you were growing up, your feelings toward the church changed. And I just wanted to ask you, now, because of how we see it nowadays, same-sex attraction and religion seem to be at odds with each other. And just wanted to ask you, once your relationship with the church and changes, would you say your relationship with God also changed?
Yeah, in regards to same-sex attraction and that journey, yeah, for sure. I mean, um, we obviously know what the church teaches, well, what Christianity teaches generally. I mean, the Bible is pretty clear what it teaches about homosexuality. Um, and so when I started coming to terms with these feelings I was having, um, it really changed how I viewed God. Um, and if the God of Abraham was even someone I believed in because of what he taught through his prophets. And ultimately, it led me to reject him, um, because I just saw the Christianity. Well, I mean, I saw the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Christianity generally as a hateful religion, at least towards people like me. You know, I don't believe that to be the case today, but that's how I saw it.
I see. And what was that process like to think that and then where you're at now? Yeah, maybe it's covering a large period of time, but how did you go to maybe having trouble with how religion works to become a religious person?
Well, for a long time, for many years, I was really bitter against the church and against Christianity generally, and I tried to find God in lots of different religions and spirituality types, and um, I was really trying to find a God who would allow me to have some semblance of spirituality, but still accept my sexuality. So really, I was trying to form God after my image rather than, you know, me conforming to him. And I will say I found good teachings and truth in a lot of different types of spirituality and a lot of different religions, but it always left me feeling empty. Like I needed more, but I didn't know where to get it. I guess I did know where to get it, but I was absolutely never going to accept the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like that was an absolute no. Um, so I went everywhere but to him. And the reason it changed is I feel like as I was searching through these different spirituality types and different religions, I felt like it kept leading me closer to the church as much as I didn't want to recognize that. But um, the main catalyst in that was my brother joining the church and helping like proselyte me back to the church. And I pushed back against that a lot, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it until I had a powerful spiritual experience that helped me to see that Jesus is the Christ. And so I really didn't want to acknowledge that, because it meant I had to change a lot in my life in order to be faithful to that witness. But yeah, I think that was the biggest changing factor was having that spiritual witness that Jesus Christ is real and that he's my savior. I was in a serious relationship with another man at the time, and I I guess I should specify a romantic relationship with another man. Um, and it was definitely a lot of complicated emotions because I loved this man in a romantic way, but I also had this witness that Jesus is the Savior, and I knew what that implied. And but I felt that I had been living inauthentically for the past few years that I've been in gay relationships. And just as a side note, I think it's important to note that a lot of critics of the church and of Christianity will say that people who are gay or who are same-sex attracted who abstain from living that way are living inauthentically of their true self. And honestly, I think it's the reverse, that when we are living that way, we're living inauthentically. But when we're living in gay relationships, we're living inauthentic to our identity. And so I felt that when I had that witness of the Savior, but I also realized like I needed, in order to really follow Christ, I needed to make big changes. And one of those changes was breaking up with my boyfriend. And so I made a complete change where I broke up with him. I moved to a completely new city. I I there were a lot of changes that I had to make. It that uh, keeping the law of chastity, stopping drinking and smoking, like um. So I made all those changes pretty rapidly, um, and it was really difficult. It was really heartbreaking at times, but I think all of us need to be broken. I think we all need to have this experience some sort of brokenness in order to let God in to change us. And as hard as it I felt God's grace coming in, helping me to make those really difficult choices. And I honestly would never go back. So um it's just not worth it. So
I see. And again, I'll put a pin on it. In
mhm.
case I go back to it real quick. But thank you for sharing that, Timber. And maybe using the pin I previously put on. Uh, you mentioned that you were younger. Your mom took you to maybe cult training. What it was called.
And it was an anti-cult specialist.
Okay.
So a lot, just for clarification, a lot of evangelical churches here in the United States have a ministry dedicated specially to dealing with cults, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is considered a cult to them. So like us and the Testigos de Jehovah and the Catholics, there's a lot of sometimes Seventh Day Adventists. They consider all those cults. So yeah.
Yeah, and for example, maybe here in Mexico, I've seen that when people say a cult, uh, maybe there's a misunderstanding between members and non-members on what that means. For
Mhm.
example, when members in my wards and stakes have said that some people say the church is a cult, they usually think about maybe people think that we worship Satan or something like that. So, but I've seen that the definition that some people give is a bit different. And so, when you were having that ministry, how was cult defined, and how was the church, or why was the church considered a cult?
Well, honestly, they never really defined what that meant. I think they just played off of the negative stereotypes surrounding it. Usually, like, oh, it's something where everyone is brainwashed to believe a certain way, and they aren't allowed to question things. Um, they aren't, and there's some charismatic leader that has all the power and is using it to manipulate the members to serving him. that's kind of what I understand when I was a kid. Um, but I mean, since then, there's so many different definitions of what that is, and none of them agree. But that was the understanding I had at the time about what a cult was.
And
And I always thought of a cult as something like um, Heaven's Gate. I don't know if you've heard of that, but they were in San Diego and they all committed suicide. Um, and then there was like Jonestown, where they went down to South America and they had this like colony and they all committed suicide. So like there was always this negative connotation that, oh, you're in this dangerous cult that's going to kill you eventually because you have these leaders that could potentially ask you to do anything. And are you going to be wise enough to question their manipulation? That's kind of the gist that I got from
I
it.
see. Did you ever did you ever consider that it just might be a cult, or did you ever struggle with it while being converted?
Um, I mean, I could sympathize with why people could think that. Because let's face it, we have a high demand religion. A lot of the times when people criticize the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's because we are a high demand religion. And but they use that as a pejorative, like as something negative, saying that high demand religions are the telltale sign of a cult. And that's just not the case. Because I knew what Jesus Christ taught. I mean, Jesus Christ taught that if you don't deny yourself, if you don't take up your cross and follow me, if you love your father and mother more than me, then you're not worthy of me. That's pretty high demand. So if people are criticizing the church for it being high demand religion, and that's a dangerous thing, then they're also just criticizing Jesus and what he taught. Because Jesus taught the same things that the church teaches, that we're supposed to give all of ourselves, consecrate all of ourselves. And so I kind of, even though I heard the word cult thrown around, I guess I had a firm testimony early on that, hey, Jesus demands all of demands all of us to be sacrificed on the altar, not just a part of us. And I think that kind of goes along with my experience of converting to the church, breaking up with my boyfriend, giving up the gay lifestyle, as I realized I need to get rid of all my carnal self in order to be able to truly follow Christ. And so I guess it never really bothered me because I realized, because the sacrifice was part of my conversion story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I'll maybe expand upon it down the line. But yes,
Hmm.
yes, it makes sense. And this connects to, becoming a member of a church. And I think that all of us in one way or another have things to change, things to uh, do that we weren't doing before. So tell us a little bit more about what was your experience like. You get baptized, you move to a different city. What happens next?
So it actually took me a year to get baptized because I had some stuff I needed to work out with my mission president, particularly regarding my same-sex attraction. And so from the time that I received that witness till when I got baptized was about a year. And during that time, I was just preparing myself. I I dove headfirst into the church and attended sacrament meetings. Um, I lived at the Institute building practically, doing attending classes, and I was doing lots of genealogy. So like when I say I did a full 180, I totally changed from this gay partying lifestyle to being totally enveloped in the gospel. And I still had lots of faults and issues and sins I needed to work through, but um, I was all in. And yeah, so I got baptized in February 18th of 2012, and I was 22, and yeah, I mean, I I was definitely tempted to indulge, like break the law of chastity and break the word of wisdom, but it wasn't. It really wasn't that much because I feel like the Lord was really helping me during that time to giving me an outpouring of grace so that I could withstand those temptations. And so I never fell back into it, thank God. Um, but yeah, that's kind of basically how it happened. I know I'm kind of an unusual circumstance, but that's how it worked for me. I always wanted to be a husband and a father from really young. Like I that was my dream when I was living a gay lifestyle, is I wanted to find my future husband and adopt children. But I realized that that was just a counterfeit for what God truly intended. And so when I joined the church, I always had faith and hope that even if I didn't marry in this lifetime, no blessing would be denied if I kept my covenants, right? Um, so I always had the hope that it could happen. I had no idea how it would happen because I've never been sexually attracted to women. But and I pretty much consigned myself to be single and celibate for the rest of my life. Um, but I didn't want to I didn't want to not have faith enough to try it if the opportunity provided itself to be able to marry. So when so I did serve a mission, and during at the end of my mission, I felt a really strong prompting that when I got back from my mission, I needed to start dating. And um, I was really scared about doing that because I just, again, I didn't know how that would work out. And a lot of and when I did start dating, a lot of it was really discouraging because I never felt any sort of like deep connection with any of the sisters. um, but and at one point I kind of had given up. Uh, and it was at that point when I had somewhat given up that the Lord helped me to find my wife. Um, it's kind of interesting how he works that way. But I know that's not everyone's experience. But I personally believe a lot of individuals with same-sex attraction who are trying to be faithful to the gospel, I think too many of them completely disregard marriage because it looks like it's too hard, like it won't work out. Um, or the culture, society, liberal culture, um, tries to convince us that, oh, we're going to be living inauthentically, and it's going to be a total it's going to be unfair to our future wives or future spouses. And so we shouldn't do that because it's just a really bad option. And I think a lot of that is a lie. I I think for many people it can work out, and I know many people like myself who they have wonderful marriages, and um, they have their challenges, but every single marriage has challenges, whether it's same-sex attraction or mental illness or financial issues or infertility or one spouse struggles with pornography. Every single marriage has its challenges. And just because your marriage your particular circumstances may be different than someone else's doesn't mean you shouldn't consider sacrificing to enter into a celestial marriage. I think there are very few circumstances where God may have called particular individuals to singleness in this life, and that's good and glorious. Um, but I think a lot of people, again, they just totally discount marriage because it's too hard, and that's not the right thing to do either. So, but I think it's ultimately between you and God about deciding where God is leading you and then doing the work to sacrifice your life to live in harmony with his will rather than your own will. So that's how I see it.
Do you have any last words or anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, follow Jesus Christ. That's the only way to have joy, and the best way to live authentically is to be true to your eternal identity. So if you really want to have joy, you do those two things.
Thank you, Timber.